Have you ever felt like the room shifts when you speak, but not because they're listening, because they've already dismissed you? Like your words hover in the air for a second too long, and then vanish, unanswered. Your palms stay open too long. Your spine folds a little, and the silence that follows isn't peaceful. It stings. You feel it in the tension behind your eyes, in the shallow breath you didn't notice you were holding. That moment, it's not confusion, it's recognition. Something inside you knows. You just gave away power. And here's the truth most men never face. You're not invisible by accident. You're training the world to ignore you. Every time you over-explain, every time you laugh too fast, every time you shrink your voice to avoid making waves, you're betraying yourself. You think you're being kind, strategic, safe. It's a lie. You've been taught that strength looks like loud opinions and constant motion. But real power doesn't beg. Real power doesn't smile to be liked. Real power doesn't perform. It chooses. It waits. It watches. And when it moves, people feel it. But you've been moving like a shadow, hoping someone finally notices the shape. And deep down, you know it. You know your identity is being built on borrowed eyes, on applause you haven't earned. And it's exhausting, isn't it? If you want to stop feeling replaceable, if you want to be the one they adjust for when you walk in, you don't need to speak louder. You need to become undeniable, not by pretending to be strong, but by killing what still makes you weak. This is the moment, not to change what you do, but to change what you tolerate in yourself. Because by the end of this, you won't just recognize the behaviors that expose weak men, you'll see how to erase them, from the world around you and from the mirror in front of you. Let's begin. You think people ignore you because they're rude. You think they interrupt because they're arrogant. You think no one listens because they're distracted. But here's what's really happening. They've already judged you, not by your words, but by something deeper, your behavior. You gave off a signal before you even opened your mouth, a posture that said, "I hope I'm enough," a glance that lingered too long, a voice that checked for approval mid-sentence. It was quiet, almost invisible. But it was there, and everyone felt it. See? Weakness doesn't need a stage. It leaks. Through hesitation. Through over-explaining. Through that 1 second of silence you couldn't bear, so you filled it with nervous laughter. It's not the content of what you say, it's the way you try to say it. And that's what people respond to. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't have modern psychology, but he understood human behavior like a weapon. He watched the rooms of power. Kings, merchants, soldiers, spies. He learned this. Strong men speak less. Weak men reveal themselves, not by confession, but by pattern. They apologize before being asked. They nod too often. They need reassurance the way most people need air. And the room, the people in it, they sense it. It's primal, like animals sensing fear before the fight even starts. And here's the brutal truth. They're not dismissing your words. They're dismissing your posture. You're speaking like you owe something. You're trying to be reasonable when what's needed is conviction. You're hoping to be liked when what's respected is direction. And every time you do that, you lose weight, not physical weight, psychological weight, the kind that makes people lean in or lean out. You're trying to earn presence, but presence isn't earned, it's owned. You walk into a room and people adjust. That's presence. You speak once and no one dares to interrupt. That's presence. You set boundaries with a glance. That's presence. But it begins in silence, in how you sit with it, in how you carry tension without rushing to soothe it. Most men can't do that. They break under the quiet. They start performing, fidgeting, smiling, explaining, begging, without realizing they're begging. And this is what Machiavelli understood. Power isn't revealed through strength. It's revealed through how you handle uncertainty. The weak man fears not being seen. The strong man uses it. Because while the world talks, he listens. While others prove, he plans. So if you've ever wondered why you get overlooked, look deeper. What are you really broadcasting? Because you can fake confidence. You can fake intelligence. But behavior? Behavior never lies. And this leads us to the first crack in the mask. The addiction to explain. The need to justify yourself to others, which reveals you don't believe yourself yet. And once you see it, you'll realize You've been handing away power, one sentence at a time. Let's go deeper. You think you're being clear, that you're just explaining your position, that you're helping them understand where you're coming from, but you're not. You're leaking. Every word you add, every time you double back, every sentence that starts with "what I meant was," you're not communicating strength. You're confessing insecurity. And here's what most men never see. The need to explain is the loudest signal of self-doubt. It doesn't matter how logical your argument is. If you're still trying to justify it after you've made your point, the room has already stopped listening. Not because they disagree, because they can feel that you don't fully believe what you're saying. Machiavelli saw this in royal courts and political chambers centuries ago. He noticed that the more powerful a man was, the less he spoke. And when he did, he never repeated himself. But the pretenders, the ones desperate to appear important, they over-explained everything. Because they weren't speaking to be understood, they were speaking to be validated. Here's the brutal truth. When you're confident in your decision, you don't need a chorus of applause. You don't need everyone to get it. You don't even need agreement. You only need direction. But the over-justifier, he trades direction for comfort. He can't move without approval. He's not acting from conviction. He's begging for emotional permission. And that's why no one trusts him with real power. Because real power demands silence. It demands the kind of stillness that makes other people question themselves. It doesn't apologize before it moves. It doesn't ask for agreement before drawing the sword. And this is where it gets physical. When you're over-explaining, your chest tightens. You feel the burn in your throat, the subtle rush of heat on your neck, your body trying to fill the space with something, anything, just to avoid the tension of being doubted. But here's the paradox. The more you try to defend your decisions, the less defensible they seem. And the more you try to prove you're right, the more you prove you're uncertain. This is identity rot in real time. You're not explaining a choice. You're negotiating your worth. And if they sense that your sense of self depends on their approval, you've already lost the room. You've already lost the power. Because people don't follow clarity of speech. They follow clarity of being. So ask yourself, do you speak to lead or to be liked? Do you hold your truth like a blade? Or do you wrap it in cotton so no one gets uncomfortable? Because if your words only have strength when they're accepted, then they were never strong to begin with. This is how over-justification becomes your cage. You think you're building connection, but you're really proving you're not ready to stand alone. And this leads us to something even more deceptive. The man who hides his fear of rejection behind a smile. The man who turns submission into strategy. Weaponized niceness. Let's open that door next. You think you're being kind, accommodating, respectful, but you're not. You're folding. You say no problem when it is a problem. You say it's fine when your stomach knots in quiet resentment. You compliment people you don't admire. You agree to things that drain you. And worst of all, you smile through it. Because deep down, you're not being nice. You're being afraid. This is what Machiavelli saw long before psychology gave it a name. He studied men who seemed warm, agreeable, generous, and realized most weren't guided by strength. They were driven by survival. Because here's the brutal truth. Niceness is not the same as goodness. And when it's compulsive, when it's constant, when it kicks in before you've even registered your own boundaries, it's submission dressed in manners. You're not being generous. You're trying to be liked. You're not avoiding conflict because you're evolved. You're avoiding it because you're scared. Scared of being disliked. Scared of disappointing someone. Scared of feeling the cold air of disapproval. And so you offer what feels safe. A smile, a nod, an apology you don't believe. But the body keeps score. Your jaw tightens. Your shoulders sink. Your chest collapses inward while your mouth plays along. And slowly, moment by moment, your self-respect is traded for approval that never lasts. This is weaponized niceness. When kindness becomes a mask to avoid being seen. You don't take up space, you reduce yourself in advance, hoping no one steps on you. And when it doesn't work, when the validation doesn't come, when your silence gets ignored, when your niceness gets mistaken for weakness, you flip. You get bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. You start resenting the very people you tried to please. Because deep down you expected a return. Your kindness wasn't free. It was bait. That's what makes this kind of weakness so dangerous. It doesn't look like fear, it looks like virtue. But underneath it's a quiet panic. a man who hasn't learned to say no without guilt, a man whose identity dissolves under pressure, a man who confuses approval with safety. Machiavelli warned of this. He said, "A prince must know how to do wrong, and not use it unless compelled. That's power under control. Restraint, not fear. Because real strength doesn't fear rejection. It sets boundaries with clarity, not apology. It speaks truth that might cause discomfort, because comfort was never the goal." So ask yourself, is your niceness a gift or a shield? Do you offer it from confidence or from fear of being seen for who you really are? Because if you only feel safe when you're pleasing everyone, you're never safe at all. And this leads us to the most desperate behavior of all, not silence, not smiling, but the addiction to be seen. Let's talk about the man who can't breathe without attention. Let's talk about display addiction. You think you're being confident. That showing up, speaking loud, being noticed, means you're strong. But it doesn't. It means you're starving. Because if your value depends on being seen, then you disappear the moment no one's looking. Let that settle. You walk into a room and you scan for eyes. You speak not to express, but to be remembered. You exaggerate your story just enough to get the reaction. You check the mirror one last time. You check your phone again, and again, and again. Not because something changed, but because you haven't been reminded that you exist. This isn't confidence. It's identity rot. Machiavelli saw this behavior long before social media made it normal. He watched men posture, parade, perform, and knew one thing. The man addicted to display is the easiest to control, because all you have to do is clap, or worse, stop clapping. Display addiction isn't driven by ambition. It's driven by fear. Fear of being invisible. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of fading quietly into the background where no one claps, no one validates, and no one remembers your name. But here's the brutal truth. The more you need to be seen, the less you actually are. Because people can feel it. When your words are bait. When your smile is performance. When your success is a stage, not a foundation. And the world watches, but it doesn't respect. Because real power doesn't need to be witnessed. It doesn't refresh the feed. It builds in silence. Meanwhile, you're burning energy not to grow, but just to remain visible. You're exhausting yourself trying to be impressive when you haven't even figured out if you're solid without applause. This is why you collapse the moment you're ignored. That sudden drop in your mood when the message gets left unread. The hollow echo you feel when your achievement goes unnoticed. The internal tremble when the spotlight turns somewhere else. Because attention isn't a reward to you. It's oxygen. And here's where Skinner's insight lands hard. Behaviors reinforced with irregular praise become addictive. That's what you're caught in. You're a lab rat chasing validation crumbs, not because they're satisfying, but because sometimes they appear, and your mind has linked them to survival. That's not strength, it's dependency. So ask yourself, if no one applauded, would you still do it? If no one saw it, would it still be worth it? If you had to live in silence for a season, would you break or build? Because the man who needs to be seen is already being led, and the man who can disappear on purpose and will always return with more power than when he left. This leads us to a different kind of weapon, not behavior, but perspective, not exposure, but leverage, the art of turning weak men into tools. Let's talk about how power is engineered, not earned. You've seen it now. The over-justifier, the compulsive appeaser, the display addict. They don't look dangerous. They look lost, harmless, forgettable. But here's what most people miss. The weak man isn't your enemy. He's your leverage. And that changes everything. Machiavelli didn't fear weak men because they were aggressive. He feared them because they were pliable, easily shaped, desperate for direction. And if you understood what they craved, you could make them move without ever pushing. Validation, inclusion, visibility. These aren't random preferences. They are psychological fault lines. And the man who knows how to trace them can collapse someone from the inside out or build an empire on their need to matter. Because here's the brutal insight. Weak men don't betray you because they're evil. They betray you because someone else made them feel seen. They will sell out their friends, their values, even their own sense of self, just to sit closer to the flame of recognition. And if you know that, you don't need to intimidate them. You just need to illuminate their hunger. One nod, one compliment, one carefully timed silence, and they're yours. Not out of loyalty, but out of dependency. That's what Machiavelli mastered. Not dominance, engineering. He understood that power isn't seized by force, it's delegated by desperation. So he gave each type what they couldn't resist. To the overjustifier, he offered agreement. A calm, "that makes sense." Suddenly, the man felt validated, finally seen, and without even realizing it, began to orbit around Machiavelli's approval, defending him, following him, needing more. To the appeaser, he offered belonging, a place, a small task with significance. He didn't ask for loyalty. He designed it by letting the weak man feel safe inside his shadow. To the display addict, he gave the illusion of spotlight. Let him speak. Let him wear the crown in public. While behind the curtain, Machiavelli pulled every string. This is the architecture of control. Don't fight the weak. Feed them. Give them just enough to stay hooked. Let them believe they chose you. Let them chase your presence while never realizing how deeply they've been scripted. Because once they feel seen, needed, admired, they'll build your palace brick by brick thinking it's their own design. And if they turn on you, you don't argue, you withdraw. Let silence be their undoing. Because a weak man thrives only in proximity to power. Remove the source, and he evaporates. And this leads us to the most elegant tactic of all. Not how to command people, but how to shape their perception so precisely they choose to obey. Silent strategy. Let's build it now. They think you need to speak to lead. They think power shows up loud, sharp, and fast. But they're wrong. Because real control doesn't move like a hammer. It moves like gravity. Silent, constant, unavoidable. This is what Machiavelli understood. While others chased titles, he studied responses. He didn't dominate rooms, he shaped them. Not by shouting orders, but by becoming the center of psychological gravity. So here's what they'll never teach you in leadership books. The man who speaks least when calibrated right controls the most. Why? Because silence is never neutral. It either creates space for anxiety, or it becomes the authority in the room. And most weak men crumble in that space. They fill it with jokes, with excuses, with noise. They rush to soothe their own discomfort, and in doing so, they expose what you needed to know all along, how deeply they fear stillness. But if you can hold that stillness, if you can breathe in the awkward moment, look someone in the eye without scrambling for the next word, you flip the dynamic. Suddenly, they're performing for you. This is how influence begins. Not when they understand you, but when they start adjusting to your presence. Let's go deeper. The overjustifier is waiting for your approval. Say less. Let him explain himself into loyalty. The appeaser is scanning for safety. Give none. Let your unpredictability make him earn it. The display addict craves recognition, offers silence. Let him dance until he exhausts himself chasing your gaze. And when you do speak, make your words feel expensive. A single compliment, one nod, a quiet, "You're right," when timed precisely, can rewire someone's internal sense of value. They start chasing it. They remember it. They attach to you, not because you forced them, but because you made them feel chosen. This is the paradox of silent power. The less you give, the more they invest. But here's where most men ruin it. They reward too consistently. They become predictable. And predictable power is no longer power. It's a routine. Machiavelli mastered unpredictability. Some days warm, others cold. Visible, then gone. He understood that uncertainty builds obsession. When people don't know where they stand, they keep working to find their place. And in that confusion, they surrender control without realizing it. So here's the question. Can you hold silence long enough for others to feel its weight? Can you become the man whose presence speaks more than his words? Because if you can, you no longer need to convince anyone. They'll convince themselves. And this leads us to the next frontier. Not how to manage others, but how to confront the one weakness you can't manipulate. Your own. Let's hunt it. Let's dismantle it. From the inside out. Until now, we've focused on identifying weakness in others. But here's the turning point. What you don't confront in yourself will control you in silence. Because the most dangerous kind of weakness isn't loud, obvious, or messy. It's subtle. It disguises itself as kindness, humility, even logic. And it lives inside your smallest habits. That nervous laugh. That one extra explanation. That moment when you agree, not because you mean it, but because you don't want to feel the sting of disagreement. This is the weakness you've normalized, the kind that grows roots while you pretend it's not there. And here's the brutal truth. You've been betraying yourself in slow motion. Every unnecessary apology, every time you adjusted your truth to keep the peace, every time you smiled instead of said what needed to be said, you weren't avoiding conflict. You were abandoning yourself. Machiavelli feared betrayal, but not from enemies, from within, because he understood something men still run from. You can't lead others if you're still submitting to your own fears. This is where Carl Jung's wisdom cuts deep. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your fear of being disliked? Unconscious. Your need for applause? Unconscious. Your addiction to validation, to noise, to being seen. It's not identity, it's programming. And unless you learn how to pause and look into the mirror without flinching, you'll keep projecting strength on the outside while collapsing on the inside. So how do you hunt this? You start with discomfort. Notice the moments you feel the urge to explain. Ask, am I speaking from clarity or from fear of being misunderstood? Watch how often you say yes, not because it's right, but because no feels too sharp. Ask, would I still agree if I wasn't afraid of losing their approval? Study your relationship with silence. Do you fill it to feel in control? Or can you sit inside it until others start shifting? Track your exposure. Do you post, share, perform because you have something solid to offer? Or because you're chasing that quick dopamine hit of being seen? This is the war, not out there, in here. Because once you spot the cracks, you have two options. Numb them through distraction, validation, performance, or kill them through brutal honesty and internal reprogramming. This is where the transformation begins, not by adding new habits, but by removing every behavior that screams, please like me. Because when you strip away every gesture of fear, what's left is presence, solid, still, untouchable. And that presence, it doesn't beg, it doesn't shrink, it doesn't collapse, it radiates. And this leads us to the final evolution, not performance, not strategy, but identity without fracture. Let's build the man no one can shake. Let's become the standard. You've seen what weakness looks like in others. You've hunted it in yourself. And now, you stand at a choice. One that most people never even realize exists. Do you continue explaining, apologizing, performing? Or do you begin living in a way where none of that is necessary? Here's the truth. Most men spend their entire lives managing perception. They build masks, adjust tones, chase recognition, but they never stop to ask, what if the version I'm showing the world isn't even me? They don't realize that what they call personality is often just trauma wearing a costume, that their charm is a survival reflex, that their kindness is fear dressed up as virtue, that their ambition is just noise designed to drown out self-doubt. But here's what happens when you strip it all away. When you stop justifying, stop begging, stop pretending, you don't become cold, you become clear. You realize that you don't need to raise your voice to set a boundary. You don't need to post everything to prove you're progressing. You don't need to be understood by everyone, just respected by the few who can actually meet you where you stand. That's what being the standard means. You don't chase the room, you shape it. By being so grounded, so internally calibrated, that others feel their own chaos just by being near your calm. And no, this isn't about perfection. It's not about becoming some stone-faced statue who never feels fear. It's about discipline over your reactivity. It's about being aware of the emotions, but never ruled by them. It's about removing every compulsion to seek what already exists inside you. Because the truth is, the man who truly knows himself doesn't need constant reminders that he's worthy. He already decided that in silence. That's why respect follows him. That's why people lower their tone around him. Not because he demands it, but because he emanates something they haven't mastered yet, self-possession. And that's the moment everything changes, when you no longer need to play the game because you've become the scoreboard. From now on, your presence is the strategy, your calm is the response, your silence is the resistance, and your self-respect, that becomes the invisible line no one is allowed to cross. You don't get walked on anymore, not because you bark, but because people sense they couldn't even lift your shadow. So breathe, feel your spine lengthen. Feel the tension drain from needing to prove anything, and ask yourself, maybe for the first time, What would it feel like to no longer need to be liked, to be understood, to be chosen? Because I've already chosen myself, that's not ego, that's liberation. And if this message hits something real inside you, don't let it stop here. The next chapter is already waiting. We'll go even deeper into discipline, identity, control, clarity, because you're not done becoming. You're just getting started. Stay here. We're building something unshakable. If you made it this far, then something inside you already knows. This wasn't just a video. It was a mirror, a confrontation, and maybe, finally, a beginning. Because what you just heard wasn't a list of traits or tricks. It wasn't about calling out the weak or pretending to be strong. It was about seeing, with ruthless clarity, the exact moments where you've been giving your power away. Silently, habitually, unconsciously. You saw it in the over-justifying, in the smiling that hides surrender, in the desperate need to be seen, even when it costs you your soul, in the noise you create just to silence your own doubt. But here's what matters now. You're not that man anymore. Not if you decide you're not. Because awareness is the pivot point, the moment where behavior becomes choice, and choice becomes identity. You don't need anyone's permission to change. You don't need applause to rebuild yourself. You don't need to announce it. You just need to begin. Silently, intentionally, inwardly. The shift is this: from over-explaining to holding presence, from pleasing to setting boundaries, from performing to becoming, from being watched to being followed. Because the men who build legacies, the ones who can't be shaken, they don't chase power, they become it. They make peace with discomfort. They lead from stillness. They don't demand attention. They redefine what deserves it. And you can feel it, can't you? Something changed. Maybe in your chest, maybe in your gut, maybe in your silence. You're remembering something you always knew deep down. You were never meant to beg the world for recognition. You were meant to be the standard it adjusts to. So now ask yourself, what's the first behavior you're done tolerating in yourself? What's the last time you apologized for who you are? And what kind of man would you become if every word, every pause, every decision from this moment on came from conviction, not survival? Let the world keep performing. Let them keep explaining. Let them chase applause, distraction, and shallow power. You build in silence. You remove the unnecessary. You move with purpose. And when you speak, you change the temperature in the room, because you've earned what most never will, the ability to look in the mirror and not see a performance, but a man fully returned to himself. And if that's who you're becoming now, don't disappear. This is the beginning of something far bigger than a video. Subscribe if this shook something in you. Share it with the one person who needs to hear it. Not because you want to spread content, but because you're done watching people you care about stay small. And if you're ready to take this even deeper, we're going further, into discipline, identity, control, presence, legacy. You won't need to yell. You won't need to prove anything. You'll just need to keep showing up, silently, steadily, unapologetically, as the man who no longer asks the world for respect, but teaches it how to give it. We'll see you in the next chapter, and trust me, you won't be the same.